Good evening. Welcome everyone to the Louisville City Council special meeting for September 27th. Could we please have a roll call?
Mayor Stolzman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Here.
Councilmember Most?
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Here.
Councilmember Fahey?
Here.
Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Lay?
Thank you, everyone. If you'll please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. And tonight our agenda topic is discussion and direction for our commercial energy code update options. I'll turn it over to staff for our presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Stolzman, members of the City Council. I'm going to make a very brief introduction and then turn it over to our consultants to make the lion's share of the presentation this evening. And of course, staff and the consultants are here to answer questions. I just wanted to start by just bringing up the work plan item. This has been on the work plan for 2 years now, so it started last year in a different version, a different iteration. We've accomplished some code upgrades. Council wanted us to go back and look at the commercial code specifically after last year's updates to our energy efficiency building codes. And so council asked us to look at the IECC net zero appendix or other net zero goals or strategic implementation of all electric construction. So at the very end of last year, we engaged with our consultants. So we have Lotus Engineering and Sustainability and Group 14 Engineering. And they helped us, of course, through some of our Marshall Fire discussions and then continued on to do this building code review, specifically looking at commercial codes. They have a very detailed report and presentation that they're going to give you. We have the Group 14 staff member that is representing us is virtual, so she can answer a lot of the technical questions. Lotus, our Lotus consultants are here to make the in-person presentation. I wanted to just bring up, I think, the 4 main questions that I think we need from council tonight on how to move. There may be other things, but in staff's mind, this is what we felt we needed direction on in order to move forward. We've presented a few code options in the reports. We're looking for which preferred pathway. There are 3 very different pathways that council can choose. There might be more, but we thought these were the 3 that we wanted to bring forward for consideration. We're going to ask for some discussion about exemptions for different industry types. So depending on what code option, there might be some consideration of exempting certain types of industries because of technical feasibility or cost feasibility for implementing certain code options. And then there may be discussion about whether the whole industry is exempt or just process loads. So just for example, in industrial development, they might have really heavy process loads in their manufacturing, and you could maybe exempt that because there's not technology or there's financial feasibility issues, but their regular heating and cooling outside of their processing could potentially meet code. We're asking for some discussion on applicability to just new construction or if there's building additions and renovations. I think we're going into this assuming whatever code option we're looking at would just apply to new construction. But some codes do create thresholds, whether by square footage or value of a project on an existing building. So we just want to get council feedback on if they only want the applicable code just to be implemented on brand new construction or building additions and renovations. And then we probably need some feedback on all electric construction. So depending on the code type, there might be some requirements that council wants to see for all electric, and if so, exemptions. Should there be certain industries exempt or parts of the development exempt? So I just wanted to set those questions up, and now I'm going to turn it over to the applicant for their presentation. Or not the applicant, sorry, the consultants.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me back tonight. Happy to be here presenting the results of our project to the council. So as Rob shared, well, I guess first let me start with introductions. My name is Kim Schlepfer. I'm a senior associate with Lotus Engineering and Sustainability. Behind me we have Claire Cantor, who is a research associate with Lotus who supported the project. And then as Rob mentioned, we have Anna McCullough from Group 14 joining us virtually, who helped with all of our policy research and building modeling. And I think it's really helpful to orient our discussion today around the City of Louisville's sustainability goals. And you all are, I'm sure, very familiar with these, but thought it would be a helpful reminder for those folks in the room not on council. So the City of Louisville has goals for municipal climate action goals and then community climate action goals. Those for the municipality include meeting electric needs with 100% or carbon-free sources by 2025 and reducing annual greenhouse gas emissions from their baseline in 2016. For the community, the City of Louisville has a goal of generating 75% of the energy electric needed for residential, commercial, and industrial properties from carbon-free sources by 2030, and then also reducing annual greenhouse gas emissions of the community through 2030. And this is the second of sort of step in the process towards moving in a direction of net zero and greener construction codes. In the fall of 2021, the City Council adopted the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code along with the rest of the I-codes, and that included some specific residential and commercial supporting amendments. One of those supporting amendments in particular was on the residential new construction side of things, and that was the adoption of the Zero Energy Appendix within the Energy Conservation Code, which requires single-family homes to be net zero. And this is just a quick look at some of the amendments that were included with the 2021 code adoption. And the ones that I want to point out because they're relevant and we should remember that they'll carry through to all of the code options that we're considering today include the EV charging infrastructure, the electric readiness requirement to have conduit and pre-wiring wherever gas appliances are installed for future electric appliances, and the solar ready zone for commercial and multifamily buildings, and a requirement for net zero offsets with the residential buildings. Quickly to define, I just sort of shared this, electric readiness and the appendix RC, which is the net zero energy appendix. Electric readiness means that if any residential home and tonight commercial building that uses natural gas for space and water heating must have pre-wiring and a dedicated circuit for future electric equipment to be installed in those buildings. And then Appendix RC is the Zero Energy Appendix, and it requires that single-family homes be meet a little bit higher of an efficiency standard and then offset all of their energy use with on or off-site renewable energy. And quickly, why is continuing to update codes important? We know climate change is here. It's happening in Colorado. Your community was impacted in a very severe way early this year. And it's a public health issue. And I think, importantly, local communities really have an opportunity to be leaders in this state when it comes to building code, as we've seen from we've seen that in examples from communities around the state. So this phase of our project and what we're going to be presenting tonight was looking at new construction code options that will encourage higher efficiency, net zero, and/or all electric for new construction in multifamily and commercial buildings. And it's a very timely effort that the city is undertaking because concurrently, there is a regional code effort going on in the greater Louisville region. The Boulder County won a grant from the Department of Local Affairs to organize a regional code cohort that had two objectives. The first, which is phase one, is to collectively as a region adopt the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code and supporting amendments that are consistent throughout the region. The supporting amendments identified by the cohort are solar ready, EV ready, electric preferred, which I'll define on the next slide, and some additional efficiency above code. All of those supporting amendments apply to both residential and commercial buildings. And phase one, we've wrapped up our meetings and our draft code package for this phase. And right now, each of the regional communities participating in the cohort are those who have not already adopted the IECC 2021 are working to move these code adoptions forward. Phase 2, which you see started in August, is to develop a regional roadmap to reach net zero new construction by 2030. The idea being, as a larger region, putting together a roadmap vision on how the communities all can get there together will support all of the communities in taking those more aggressive steps in building code. And we expect that roadmap to be wrapped up in December of this year. So these are the communities participating in the regional cohort. The ones on the top that you see there participated in phase 1, and then the 3 on the bottom are only participating in phase 2. Excuse me. And quickly to define electric preferred, which was one of the amendments in phase 1, basically it's saying for any natural gas systems installed in buildings, those buildings have to do additional efficiency steps. Louisville's current code is something very similar, where if you use natural gas in a building, you have to use high efficiency gas appliances. So for our project, in order to get started, we did 2 different things. First, we looked at what are building codes and policies from around the state and around the US that could apply here in Louisville. What's being done, what's already out there. And then we did some building energy modeling. And this, I should say, Group 14 conducted both of these tasks. So what we did was look at 4 different building types, and we're only going to focus on the top 3 there tonight, that are typical of new construction in the city of Louisville, to see what is the cost, upfront cost of these, of building to the 2021 code, what is the operational cost to run these buildings, if we're going to pursue a net zero requirement, how much PV do these buildings need in order to reach a full offset, and then what is the greenhouse gas emissions of those options. And so we ran this modeling for code compliant buildings as well as for each of our policy options, and we'll show you that data here as we go through. And I'm going to skip that slide and come right back to it. So our policy options that we'll present tonight sort of fall into these 3 categories. We have net zero with renewable energy, we have enhanced energy efficiency, and then we have an all-electric option. And again, it's important to consider when we move through all these policy options that all of these would be in addition to the 2021 code, the efficiency strengthening amendments Louisville has in place, EV readiness, solar readiness, and electric readiness. And I wanted to start off by just showing and putting into context the greenhouse gas emissions, the anticipated greenhouse gas emissions of buildings built to code today and in 13 years, by 2035. And we wanted to make sure we were showing this data because, as you all know, the electric grid in Louisville, powered by Xcel, is getting continually cleaner. And as Xcel has renewable energy targets that they're aiming to meet in the next decade, as they move towards achieving those targets, the emissions from electricity from our newly constructed buildings will go down. So the gray bars you see on the left are the emissions of those code-built buildings today, and then the green bar is those code-built building emissions in 2035. And that delta is the delta that we see from a greener electricity grid. So our options we're presenting tonight. The regional code cohort, we just spoke about that. We'll include that for comparison's sake so you all have a sense of how these options compare to what the region is considering. We'll look at policy option 1, which is an energy performance standard, and then we'll talk about policy option 2, which is a net zero standard. And there's going to be 2 parts to that policy option 2, simply a net zero standard, and then a net zero plus an all-electric standard. And before I dive into the policy options, wanted to cover a little bit of the public feedback that we've received through this process. So Lotus supported the city staff in reaching out to the public, and that engagement included 2 community meetings, 1 public survey, and then we met with the LSAB board and the building code board to discuss these policy options with them as well. And there are some key takeaways I wanted to share. One of the questions we asked in the survey is, what's the most important thing that the city council should consider when they're adopting stricter energy codes? And we kind of had to bucket it into 3 options: the climate emergency, economic development, finding a balance in between those 2, or other. As you guys can see, the balance in the climate emergency shook out on top, But the other section also had quite a few responses, and you can see some of the write-in responses for that on the slide here. I think most of those trended towards a less favorable view of new energy codes. So generally from our community feedback sessions, we heard that the Louisville community does not feel ready for an aggressive approach to energy code updates. Across all sectors and policy considerations, the biggest concern is financial. People were worried about driving up home costs. They were worried about cost to builders and tenants, and they were worried that imposing stricter building codes would drive businesses away from the city of Louisville. And these are some other bullets of our key takeaways. I'll run through them quickly, and hopefully you guys had a chance to review our full public engagement summary in your packets. But so we want to share, while many folks lean towards opposing the policy considerations, quite a few survey responses also indicated that there was support for these. The largest benefit of increased energy code stringency was reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and public health improvements such as air quality. There was a lot of curiosity around the regional code and thinking about alignment with the communities around the city of Louisville. There was a general sentiment that the city should take its time with the building code effort and consider all of the impacts, especially those to existing buildings and businesses. A concern around procuring off-site solar, which we'll dive into a little bit further later in the presentation. And then questions around feasibility of meeting these different code standards, as well as feasibility of the electric grid to manage all electric new construction and net zero new construction. So with that, we'll dive right in. So policy consideration 1 is setting an energy performance standard for different building types. And what this means is that projects would be required to meet a maximum allowed energy use per square foot, also called site EUI, and we'll make sure we use that term, for if buildings pursue a performance pathway in the code, and additional efficiency requirements if they pursue a prescriptive pathway in the code. With this, that energy use per square foot metric that would be used to set the standard, if a building wanted to put PV on their roof, that would help contribute to lowering the energy use of that building. This would still require a solar-ready zone, an electric-ready construction, and EV readiness. So I'll take a moment to kind of explain what that energy use per square foot is. When you're talking about EUI, which is energy use intensity, which was the metric that would be used here, you're looking at all of the energy consumption in a building. So this is your plug loads, your lighting, your HVAC, your heating, your cooling, your water heating, everything that goes into a building. You're changing all of that energy use to a common metric. In this case, we usually use BTUs because electricity and natural gas can both be, converted to BTUs, thank you. And then you take all of that energy use, that's a big bucket over here. If you have on-site PV, whatever energy that's generating, you subtract it from the total energy use of your building, and then you divide it by the square footage, and that equals some number, BTU per square foot. So that's the standard that we would be looking to set, and it would be set by building type. So what does that look like? The city of Boulder has a energy performance standard in place for new construction, and then the New Buildings Institute, which is a nonprofit that works on developing building decarbonization codes, also has a performance standard that they've developed for zero energy buildings. And these numbers probably don't mean a whole lot, and hopefully they will once we start to show you some data comparing a code-built building to what it would look like to meet these standards. But these are examples of energy performance standards that the city could set. And they would be set by building type. So you can see in the table, medium office to a certain size would have a certain EUI standard. Certain size apartments would have a EUI standard, schools, etc. So it would be bucketed by building type. And the New Buildings Institute Zero Energy Performance Standard, I just want to speak to that a little bit. What MBI did is look at, okay, what energy use per square foot does a building need to hit in order to offset all of their energy with on-site PV? And so that standard is a very aggressive standard. And That's the number. These are the numbers we're going to use as a comparison's sake to show how far off code-built buildings in Louisville will be to meeting those zero energy standards. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand what I'm looking at. So the column on the left is the City of Boulder's performance standards for these different types of buildings. And the column on the right is what you have to achieve to be net zero? Is that?
Yeah, it's the efficiency that you would have to achieve in a building in order to offset 100% of the energy on your roof.
So the City of Boulder is setting the standards higher than that? Is that what I'm seeing here?
Correct. So
Okay.
the City of Boulder's targets are higher than the zero energy performance targets, meaning that if a building was to hit those City of Boulder targets, they would probably need more PV than what can fit on their roof to reach a full offset, net zero offset. The higher in energy, the higher the number, the more inefficient a building is. The lower the number, the more efficient the building is.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. This is Anna. I just wanted to note that these are the City of Boulder's values from their current code, and they are working to update it right now. We don't have what their updated EUIs will be.
So I'm just trying to make sure this makes sense to me. So the numbers that the Boulder values are higher than the net zero, which means they're less efficient than the net zero, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Doing great.
Yes, these are complicated topics, and we spent a whole lot of months studying them. So thanks for asking. Great question. So what we wanted to do is look at what's the delta between a code-compliant building in the city of Louisville and meeting these energy performance standards. So what we did was calculate the site EUI, which again is the energy use per square foot of a building built to code, compared to the energy use per square foot that's included in the zero energy performance standards from MBI. So if you look at the office building and the multifamily building, you'll notice that there are some HVAC designs that a building could pursue that would get them pretty close to that zero energy performance standard. The one thing to note with the retail building is that the MBI performance standard, the building that they looked at did not include restaurants. When they set that target, the buildings that we modeled for retail buildings included 2 restaurants, like a fast food service and a sit-down restaurant. And that's why you see such a huge discrepancy in the energy use per square foot metrics there. And the big thing I want to call attention to on this slide is, well, I guess there's 2 things. One, that in some cases, code-compliant buildings are not that far off from meeting these standards. And 2, if you'll look, in most cases, the all-electric option, if you were to build an all-electric building, results in a lower energy use per square foot. And so what we think, a benefit of this policy option is that simply by way of using only one fuel source in your building, you will be able to reach a lower EUI than you might if you use two fuel sources. And then we wanted to look at what does this cost? And we'll provide a summary graph that looks at all the costs together. So if these don't make a ton of sense on their own, we'll get to the comparison in a bit. But we modeled what it would mean for multifamily, an office, and a retail building, both mixed fuel and all electric, to meet these energy performance standards. The cost of the HVAC system itself, because it would need to be typically a more efficient HVAC system above code. And then the EUI that we were able to earn, the energy use per square foot that you would achieve simply by optimizing the HVAC systems and envelope and lighting, and then what size of PV system would have to go on the roof in order to hit to get all the way down to that zero energy target. So again, just a high-level overview here of what these costs are, and we'll show a comparison here when we get towards the summary. And then finally, we looked at greenhouse gas emissions. And so we looked at greenhouse gas emissions for mixed fuel buildings meeting this target and all electric buildings meeting this target. So you can see there's pretty sizable greenhouse gas emission reductions for multifamily, office, and retail buildings in pursuing this energy performance pathway. And then for all electric, continued to see some big greenhouse gas emission savings for office and retail, and slightly smaller for multifamily. Okay, we're going to move on to policy option 2, which is implementation of Appendix CC, which is the zero energy appendix for commercial buildings. There are policy options 2A and 2B that we looked at under this option. The first is simply enforcing Appendix CC, and the second is requiring all electric and enforcing Appendix CC. So the net zero appendix requires that new construction offset all of their energy use with on or offsite PV. The Appendix CC, unlike the RC appendix, which was adopted for single-family homes, does not have any additional efficiency measures beyond base code compliance. So buildings complying with this would just meet code and then offset all of their energy with PV. For 2B, that only shift would be that those buildings would be built all electric and then have to offset all of their energy. As Rob mentioned, we would look to you all for consideration around exemptions for the offset requirements and or exemptions for the all electric requirements if considering this option. And in all of the buildings that we modeled, we didn't find a building that was able to, a code compliant building that was able to offset all of its energy on the roof space of the building. And so in every case that we looked at, those buildings would need to go off-site to procure the remaining renewable energy in order to be 100% net zero. And the Appendix CC has some pretty specific requirements around the off-site renewables that you can procure. The first is that you have to procure them by way of a 15-year contract. You have to procure renewable energy off-site for 15 years. The other thing is that the renewable energy you procure off-site has to be within the utility service area of your local utility. The third thing is that if you procure renewable energy off-site, Appendix CC penalizes that. And it applies what's called a procurement factor to the energy that you need to go find off-site. For things like community solar, it adds maybe a 25% increase on what you need to procure. For things like renewable energy credits, I think it's upwards of like 120%, or 5 times the amount that you'd have to procure. So based on which type of renewable energy you look to off-site, there'll be some penalty where you have to procure more than what your building's actually using. So the options in Appendix CC for off-site include community solar subscriptions, green retail tariffs, which are basically, if anyone's familiar with the wind source program from Excel, purchasing renewable energy through your utility, unbundled renewable energy certificates that you can buy on an open market from renewable energy generating anywhere around the country, and virtual power purchase agreements. Virtual power purchase agreements are basically a financial commitment to help construct some solar or wind farm, solar garden or wind farm, and then that the entity basically contracts to purchase all of the power being generated from that project. An example of a virtual power purchase agreement, this is typically for very large commercial entities. Vail Resorts engaged in a VPPA with a wind farm in Nebraska where they helped finance the wind farm, and then they get all of the credits from the renewable energy that's generated there, even though that is not, to offset the electricity of all of their resorts in North America. So typically reserved for large corporate entities such as that. And there are pros and cons to each of these approaches. Looking at unbundled renewable energy certificates, so quickly to kind of explain what these are, it's a complicated world, but when renewable energy developments are up and running, the power that they produce goes into the grid, and the environmental benefit of that power gets sold on an open market. So companies, businesses, individuals can purchase RECs or renewable energy certificates and claim the environmental benefit of that renewable energy. So the nice thing about RECs is that they're pretty low cost and they're easy to purchase. The cons of unbundled RECs is that there's no guarantee that that renewable energy is local. There's no way to track where that renewable energy is being generated. And you can't buy RECs in a 15-year contract. After doing some research, the longest contract length we were able to find for purchasing RECs was 2 years, and it's because the pricing market for RECs is very volatile. As far as green retail tariffs, which is pretty much buying RECs from your utility, they're low cost, they're from our local utility, but you can't buy them for a 15-year contract. They're on a month-to-month subscription, and they only cover electricity use. So you can't buy renewable energy credits to offset your gas use under Excel's program. For community solar, it's local. It's local renewable energy. You can get a 15-year contract. The biggest con is that there's very limited availability and there's a really high demand. And we worked with Excel to understand what the opportunity was for those, and it seems very limited. For virtual power purchase agreements, again, you can have a 15-year contract. It's likely not going to be a local renewable energy farm or garden, and there's a lot of work to set those up, and likely a single building owner wouldn't pursue something that complicated.
Which category would you put Excel's Renewable Connect program in? Because it's basically a 15-year unbundled rec program.
So Excel's Renewable Connect program, Anna,
Yeah.
looking in the ceiling, can you
It's so
speak to
funny to
that?
see you like look up.
I know, I can't see your face.
Excel's Renewable Connect program is a community solar program. However, in our experience, there is very little availability from Excel. We have had a ton of interest on the commercial side of things and have only had a couple projects be able to buy into it.
Sure, the Renewable Connect phase 1 sold out right away because of demand, but they're working on phase 2. So my question though was which category you would put it in?
Oh, community solar.
Okay,
Community solar.
thanks.
Okay, so what we did, again, lots of numbers coming at you, and I'll try and walk you through what you're looking at, is to see what is the cost of going with complying with Appendix CC and the all-electric Appendix CC. So we started with code-compliant buildings because Appendix CC does not require that you go any higher efficiency than code compliance. And we looked at the buildings that we modeled, how much renewable energy you would need to be net zero, and then how much of that renewable energy can fit on the roof of the buildings. So you'll see in the light blue, the first column there, that is the total kilowatt hours that you would need to go net zero. The next one over is the total kilowatt hours that would fit on your roof. You can see the cost of that on-site PV there, and then the energy bill savings that a building would yield with that amount of PV on their roof. Then looking at the purple-gray, it's hard to see what color that is, on the far right, the first column is how many kilowatt hours you would still need to offset with off-site renewable energy. And then what we did was we looked at the cost to do that if we were to offset all of that through the green retail tariffs and the unbundled RECs. And again, it's really important to remember that 15-year contracts aren't available for either of these. And so these numbers were extrapolated out 15 years just to demonstrate what this approximate cost could look like. Another important thing that I wanted to mention is with green retail tariffs and unbundled RECs, these are always a cost to the building owner. There is no revenue stream that you get from purchasing RECs or green retail tariffs on an annual basis. So this is how it would look for a multifamily building. And this is how it would look for an office building. So for the office building, you can fit more PV on site, but there's also a much higher PV required to reach net zero in the case of an office building. And so I'll just leave it up for a moment so you guys can see how those numbers all shake out.
When you did the math in this table, did you start with the assumption that that 100% of the electricity needed to be offset, or did you factor in how much of the electricity was renewable from the utility?
It was the former. Oh, yeah, go for it, Anna.
Yeah. Sorry, it's 100% of the total energy use in the building. So it's including all of the electricity and natural gas, if natural gas is used.
So you didn't credit any of the electricity that is already being generated from renewable from the utility in the offset? Okay.
Correct.
And Anna, correct me if I'm misspeaking here. Per the requirements of Appendix CC, that utility factor does not matter.
Correct.
Okay. And here's what it would look like for a retail building. And remember, for the retail building here, this retail building includes 2 restaurants, which are pretty high process load energy uses. So a significant amount of PV required to reach net zero in these cases. More can fit on the roof, but it's still a huge remaining offset that needs to be found offsite. Offset and offsite. You guys can track with me on that one. But the PV system would be a lot larger, yielding a lot more energy savings per year on those annual utility bills. And again, I'll just leave this up for a moment so you guys can take it all in. Okay. And then we looked at the greenhouse gas savings of this policy option. And it's really important when you're talking about RECs that you think about greenhouse gas emissions differently than you would an on-site solar array. So we calculated greenhouse gas emissions in 2 ways. The first was the greenhouse gas savings from the PV that would be on-site at the building. And the second was the greenhouse gas savings from procuring off-site renewable energy. When you're talking about greenhouse gas savings from on-site renewable energy, that is local renewable energy that is providing a direct offset to the electric grid. And so the savings here for greenhouse gases do take into account the amount of renewable energy on Excel's grid. You're only saving the greenhouse gases that are that delta between the renewable energy that Excel's providing and the fossil energy that Excel's providing. When you look at the greenhouse gas savings from offsite renewable energy, and in this case we looked at RECs, again, there's no ability to track where those RECs are being generated. And the greenhouse gas savings for those RECs would be calculated according to how clean the grid is wherever that renewable energy is. So if it's a 100% coal-powered electric grid, well, it probably wouldn't be 100 if there's a solar ground, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. 90%, let's say, coal-powered electric grid in some other state where the REC is being purchased, the greenhouse gas savings from that REC is going to be a lot bigger than if the REC was purchased in state where we have a much cleaner electricity grid. So it's really important to think about when you're looking at the greenhouse gas savings of off-site renewable energy is that it's skewed. It can be skewed pretty heavily. The other thing to think about is when you're procuring off-site renewable energy under Appendix CC, there is that procurement factor that has to be factored in. So when we buy RECs at 5 times the amount of renewable or of energy that the building's consuming, that inflates the greenhouse gas savings to 5 times what it would be if the PV was on the roof. So just things to keep in mind as we show the greenhouse gas savings between the 2. And so there's 3 graphs I'll show. The first is a mixed fuel building going to a mixed fuel net zero building. Then we'll look at a mixed fuel building going to an all electric net zero building. And then finally we'll go to an all electric building that moves to an all electric net zero building, just to show the 3 scenarios that we'd be looking at here. So this is mixed fuel to mixed fuel. Again, any fuel choice available here. You can see there are greenhouse gas savings from that on-site PV in all cases. Looking at moving a mixed fuel building to an all-electric net zero building, the greenhouse gas savings jump pretty significantly. And yep, so that's that. And then if you're moving from an all-electric building to an all-electric net zero building, the emission savings shrink just a bit from the mixed fuel to all-electric net zero. Still significant in every case. And then we pulled this graph as an entirely separate graph because it completely skewed our greenhouse gas numbers when we combined them. And so these are just showing the greenhouse gas savings that you could attribute to that offsite procurement if you're buying RECs. And again, this is specific to RECs. So Here we use the national average emissions factor for the electricity grid, so we're assuming 0.85 pounds of CO2 per kilowatt hour, and then it includes that 5 times penalty where you have to buy 5 times the RECs of your offsite. So it's a significant amount of pounds saved here for the offsite. Okay, now we're going to bring it all together. That was a lot of information. Again, looking at first at the regional cohort, there is no net zero requirement. There is no offsite PV requirement. What the strengthening amendments from the cohort include are EV readiness, PV readiness, which Louisville already has adopted, a stricter version of Louisville's electric preferred code, and additional efficiency measures. Looking at policy consideration number 1, there is no net zero requirement. There is no offsite PV required. Allows for use of extra efficiency or on-site PV to help meet those targets. So you can choose one, you can choose the other, or you can choose some combination of the two. It's up to the builder. It encourages all electric construction because lower energy performance standards are easier to reach if you're building with all electric, It's flexible with fuel choice. It allows builders to decide what they would like to do. It still requires solar ready, it still requires EV ready, and it still requires electric ready. So even if a builder builds with natural gas, they have to include all of the electric pre-wiring and all of that good stuff. Then looking at appendix CC, net zero is required. On-site and off-site PV are required, and likely off-site PV would be required in almost every case. It doesn't go above and beyond base code for efficiency. For the just strictly appendix CC, there's flexibility in the fuel choice, so you can use natural gas or all electric. Electric readiness is still required if you build with natural gas, and there could be exemptions considered. Moving to the all electric appendix CC, net zero would be required. On and off-site PV would be required. Again, no increase to base code efficiency, but there would be no fuel choice. You would have to build with electric. And again, exemptions could be considered here. Looking at all of these policy options put together for their greenhouse gas savings, the colors are hard to see, but the middle bars are the greenhouse gas savings from policy option 1, the energy performance standard for each building type. The greener bar on the right side of each option is the greenhouse gas savings from policy option 2, just looking at the on-site PV. We did not include the off-site greenhouse gas savings in this chart because it skews it pretty heavily. And then there is a lot going on in this chart, but this is the cost comparison between all of the different options. So the blue bar on the far left is the, and you'll see throughout, is the cost for base code compliance of simply the HVAC systems. Then that yellow bar is the additional cost for policy option 1 based in each of the building types. The green bar is the additional cost for policy option 2, the full net zero, but that's only for the on-site PV. And then the black bar is the appendix CC cost, including the procurement of off-site RECs. And so you can see in some cases, policy option 1 is more cost-effective for certain building types, and in others, policy option 2 with the on-site PV looks a little more cost-effective for certain building types. All represent a slight increase over the base code compliance. And we're not going to dive too deep into this, but currently how building codes interact with existing buildings, just wanted to touch on a couple of examples to get you guys thinking about how it could, how the building code could apply to existing buildings. We provided 2 examples here. The first is if you're replacing a boiler. For example, you would have to, if you're bringing in a new boiler, you would have to meet the current code for minimum efficiency of that boiler. You don't have to do anything else. You just have to meet minimum code standards. If you're doing something like adding new floor area to your building, the floor area must meet the prescriptive measures of the code. So that includes lighting, insulation, things of that nature, envelope improvements. but any untouched part of the building does not need to comply with code. If you open up this wall, you have to bring it up to code. If you don't open up this wall can stay how it is. So what you touch, you bring up to code. And so just wanted to sort of, that is how the existing building code is currently interpreted. So something to keep in mind as we discuss how this code impacts new buildings, or existing buildings. And then I wanted to wrap up with our consultant recommendations. So the project team recommends that the City of Louisville move forward with policy option 1, which is the energy performance standard, for several reasons. The first, provides flexibility for building owners to comply with code and allows for fuel choice. It does not require PV, but buildings can use on-site PV to help earn their energy goal, which would also provide a benefit in their operational cost to run the building. EUI targets are easier to achieve if you have an all-electric building, which would incentivize building owners to build all-electric. And all-electric buildings will yield significantly more greenhouse gas savings over time as the grid brings on more renewable energy. This option doesn't require any exemptions. For example, because of the net zero or offsite procurement or technology for all-electric isn't there. So any building can comply with this code. And while it doesn't align with currently with the regional code cohort phase 1 code adoption, it does align with the City of Boulder's code, which is part of the greater Louisville region. And that's all I've got.
Any questions from folks?
Can you go back one slide to that? I read that this option does not require a sentence like 10 times. I just couldn't, if you could explain that one.
The second to last bullet.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. So with Appendix CC, requiring an all-electric commercial or multifamily building might be infeasible for certain building types because the technology just doesn't exist. Same for a building looking to procure their remaining off-site with renewable energy because the renewable energy options might not be available. They can't get the contract length that's required. And so both of those options offer feasibility challenges.
This one doesn't have the same challenge.
Correct.
I disagree with you. So would you give an example of a building that's not feasible so we can discuss it further?
Not feasible for?
All electric.
Sure. And Anna, I keep looking up, might actually turn this to you since this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, a good example of that would be a hospital or restaurants. Restaurants are tough to do all electric with all their cooking equipment.
I mean, but there are absolutely technology choices available in both of those scenarios. Like there are choices for cooking. Like you can absolutely use an electric cooktop. I understand that a lot of people would prefer a choice that's a different choice than that. But to say that the technology is not available, I believe is absolutely factually incorrect.
In my experience, I'm working on my first commercial all-electric restaurant right now. And it has been very difficult for them to find more than one manufacturer of an all-electric piece of equipment that they need in their commercial equipment, or I'm sorry, commercial kitchen.
But they did find one, so awesome.
They did find
so that's
one.
not feasible.
It's definitely much more difficult to meet the all-electric requirement.
Okay, I understand that having different options and making different choices is just very different than saying, like as a blanket statement, that things aren't feasible. I just think that's incredibly misleading.
And I think, and Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, there are certain manufacturing process loads that we were considering in this where, and I'm gonna look to you again, Anna, for certain buildings where there is actual manufacturing happening where there is not all electric equipment.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are quite a few manufacturing processes that for building types that exist in Louisville that, again, without having spoken to every single manufacturing building owner within Louisville, it's hard for me to list out which specific pieces of equipment would not be able to be electrified. but being able to research the different industries that you all have there are, again, very, very difficult ways to meet an all electric requirement. That would be prohibitive for new construction building owners to comply with an all electric requirement.
I guess I'll just move on and respectfully disagree. I've built industrial buildings in 3 different countries, and different areas have different types of heating utilities. Some areas don't have any utility infrastructure to them where you build things, and there are just different solutions in different areas. Like in some cases, you can use natural gas because it's cost effective. In other areas, people use electric things. In other areas, people use heating oil. There are just lots of different fuel types, and so the way the net zero appendix interacts with, we're really talking about methane here versus all electric, and I guess the way it's presented, I just disagree with, and I'm happy to provide evidence for council if we need more information at a future meeting. Other council questions? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor and Anna. I love when you do that. I was wondering if you could go back a couple of slides. You had the different options. One more, I think, or 2. There you go, that one there. So the question I have, so on the regional code cohort, that's phase 1, correct?
Correct.
If you had phase 2 in there, I know it's not done yet, what would that look like as comparison to what's up there right now?
Yeah, great question. So I'll say Lotus is working on that project with the region, and the discussions just started. So, but I think the goal would be, we just established a definition of how the region wants to consider net zero buildings, and we determined that it was some combination of renewable energy, all electric, demand flexibility. Kayla, do you remember that last piece? There was storage, yes, and energy storage that would yield a net zero building over time. So I think as the regional code cohort is considering their options, they're definitely looking at the City of Boulder's code with the energy performance standard. The study and the work that the City of Louisville has done is going to come into play as an option to consider in looking at all the analysis that was conducted for the city. And then there are a number of net zero code standards beyond the appendix CC. Well, I wouldn't say a number, but there are a couple of options out there that from the state of Massachusetts, the City of Denver's code, that are all being actively considered. So,
Can you tell us about what Crested Butte's doing?
sure.
What was the question?
I was just asking if she could tell us about what Crested Butte is doing.
Thank you.
Yes, and Anna, feel free to correct me if I misspeak on anything. So Crested Butte just enacted an all-electric construction code. I believe the only exemption is for restaurants. And they also require commercial buildings over 5,000 square feet, to install renewable energy on-site PV that is equivalent to 2 watts a square foot, I believe, of the 3 largest floors of their building. I would have to double check that, and I'm happy to follow up with that exact language. But yes, they have an all-electric requirement. The only exemption is commercial restaurants, with an on-site PV requirement for commercial buildings over 5,000 square feet.
Other questions from folks?
Yes, if you could go forward 1 slide at a time and keep going, please. That slide. So I guess we'll just start at the very left. So 278,321, and then the plus 248. So the way I'm doing is I'm adding those. So what I keep adding is I'm going across. So when I get to the green, cost for policy 2, is that additive on top of the previous 2?
No, so you see this? So this blue bar would be added to each one of these bars individually.
Okay.
This first one is policy option 1, blue plus yellow. Policy option 2 without the offsite procurement is blue plus green. Policy option 2 with the offsite procurement cost added in is blue plus black.
Got it. One last question. One of the very early slides, and you don't have to run back and get it, but you said that the City of Boulder and another city did not participate in the cohort in phase one. Why was that?
The city of Boulder, I believe, didn't participate because their code looks a lot different than the 2021 code. They have a municipal code that they pretty much rewrote because they were making so many changes to the IECC codes that they just have their own thing kind of going on. They did want to opt into the phase two because they want to make sure that they can help the region kind of craft that roadmap to net zero. For Westminster and Berthoud, I think that they just weren't perhaps, I really can't speak to why they weren't included. Berthoud, I think, is just sort of, both of those communities, I should say, are listening into phase two rather than being active participants. So I think they just want to be aware of what the region's thinking about so they can bring it back to their councils, but they're not necessarily driving the conversation.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Other folks, Councilmember Lay.
Actually, this is a question for the mayor. I know you're following this stuff pretty carefully. Do you know what the reasons for Berthoud's and the other entities not doing phase one?
Oh, so on the staff side, I think that there were kind of multiple efforts happening on the front end of a lot of this. This started a long time ago. And so I just think on the staff side, there may be other reasons, but on the elected side, they just weren't part of the cohort that was talking about it originally. Not, you invite people to something and then people's calendars are busy and some people show up and others don't. So I think on the elected side, that was some of what was happening when we were trying to get going on getting a coalition excited about this.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand of the 11 cities, like Louisville has passed the 2021. Let's say City of Boulder pretty much has, right? It's different, but it is equivalent or even better,
I would
more
say
efficient.
their current code is equivalent to 2021, and they're looking to revise it again and make it even stricter.
What's their timing on that?
I would say within the next year. It's a staffing capacity issue from what I understand right now.
Okay. And then what other communities have already passed? I mean, Superior just passed 20, or was that commercial or just resident? Sorry, what other cities
Yeah.
in that, of the other 9 have passed 2021 IECC in any form?
So Superior adopted the 2021 IECC along with all of the supporting amendments from the cohort. Longmont adopted the 2021, and they have everything except instead of an electric preferred amendment, they just went with electric ready. And then Louisville. And then Erie's process will start in December. Lafayette's process, they just had a study session with council a few weeks ago, so they're moving, and Lafayette's interested in going beyond the cohort recommendations. As far as North Glen, I think their process got pushed back a bit. I think they're probably looking to start that process at the end of the year. And Broomfield has said they're adopting in 2023, although they just passed a EV readiness requirement for their building code. And I think that's all of them. Did I miss one?
Westminster and Berthoud have not.
Oh, right, I'm sorry. Westminster and Berthoud also have not adopted the 2021, but both have plans to.
I'm trying to pull it up, Caleb. At Metro Mayor's Caucus, we did a survey of cities and where they are on it. It's the majority of the cities in the Denver metro region are either in the process of adopting the 2021 or have adopted it. It's like Littleton, Lakewood. So I'll get that and I'll have it sent out to everybody and included in the follow-up.
Just ask a follow-on. Is
Councilmember
that for,
Most.
are we talking about residential only or residential and commercial?
In what I was answering, it was just the 2021 IECC base code, which applies to buildings. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some questions about this particular chart. I'm sort of struck by the size of the magnitude of these bars. Looks a lot like the magnitude of the bars that we saw after the fire that some of our folks who lost their homes were being quoted by developers. Is this itemized anywhere? How do we know, like, can you share some of the methods that you arrived at some of the size of these bars with us?
Yeah, this is Anna. So we pulled all of the budgets that we've received for different new construction projects within the Front Range in the last year and used them to kind of average out the estimated first cost for the HVAC systems. So this includes the entire HVAC system and then the electrical infrastructure if there is if we're looking at a mixed fuel building. It also includes the cost for domestic water heating as we're comparing natural gas versus electric water heating or heat pump water heating.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to evaluate the validity of these numbers without actually having a comparison, a side-by-side itemized comparison in each of these cases, which is what we had seen earlier in this year in evaluating some of the codes here. It's a little bit hard for me to believe that the cost doubles in some of these cases, but be that as it may. I want to go ask you a little bit about some of the outreach that you did, because you made some pretty broad and sweeping statements about what you believe our community is ready to support. And that was based on talk to me about your methods in terms of the focus groups, or how did you reach out to people and engage with them? You said there were 2 different community meetings, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so there was no comprehensive or systematic scientific survey. It was just whoever showed up at the meeting and was the loudest became sort of the recommendations, and you reflected in your report. Is that correct?
No, we also conducted an online survey.
An online survey?
In addition to those.
Okay, was
2
that
community meetings.
randomized or scientific in any way? No, it was just whoever filled out the survey.
Correct.
Great, okay, thank you.
Other questions from folks? I would love to take public comment at this time. First in the queue, we have Mark, and just so folks understand, Mark and Eric have pooled their time, and so Mark will get 6 minutes this evening. And it's open to anyone to be able to pool time. This is not, and he has done a great job of following the procedure, but if other folks would like to pool their time, both members have to be present, and you let us know that you're pooling your time, and then you'll get 6 minutes. So he'll get 6 minutes, and everyone else will get 3 minutes unless anyone else pools their time. And so with that, please tell us your name, and then tell us what you'd like to tell us.
Just a quick question on the procedure on that. If somebody is online, can they pool their time with someone who's here?
Yeah, so it's really helpful with the new virtual environment, it's really helpful if people are virtual and they plan to pool their time, that they tell us ahead of time so I can find their name in the queue, and we make sure we set it all up, and like you've filled out the pool time sheet, which we have copies of available here, but they're also available online ahead of time with instructions how to pool your time. So if you plan to pool time online, it's really helpful if you tell us ahead of time.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Mark Oberholzer. I'm the Vice President of the Downtown Business Association. I also own Tilt Pinball right here in downtown, and I live at 224 Hoover Avenue. I've got some comments of my own, and then I'm also going to read some remarks prepared by Rick Crone, who's the president of the DBA, who sat here for 4.5 hours a couple weeks ago and then was not able to make this meeting today. So he's relaxing somewhere off on the East Coast, having a great time. And I'm reading for him. So lots of things, lots of details to discuss tonight, and I don't have time, even with my 6 minutes, to really get into that. So I'm going to talk to some more generalities. I know that the DBA also submitted some questions and comments for you to look over. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on that, on some more of the detailed stuff. The business community is not ready for an aggressive energy code change at this time. I also believe that the infrastructure is not ready for such a code change as well. The business community is stressed at the moment. We're injured. We're trying to recover from COVID. We had the Marshall fires. We lost our New Year's Eve revenues. We've still got staffing issues, supply chain issues, inflation, interest rate increases. The town has a lot of vacancies, as you're all aware, of Kohl's and Lowe's and Cinnabar, Sam's Club, Wildwood Guitars, the old Waterloo, Chase Bank. We lost our economic vitality director, who has not yet been replaced. So I think it's just not the time to add a new stress to the business community. Let's let the businesses get healthy. Let's get the sales tax revenues under control, and then let's talk about making some of these changes. As for the infrastructure, I've looked a little, and I've not really heard a solid answer on what the current makeup of Excel's energy supply is or what their plans are for the future, but I do know that coal prices have gone up 281% this year since February. One of the reasons, according to an NPR story, is that the electricity demand has gone up so much that the power companies in Europe have had to reactivate their coal plants in order to keep up with demand. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about some of the consequences, and I don't want to move ahead of the curve and create those same problems here. And another analogy I thought of is that just as doctors will not perform a beneficial surgery to somebody who's not healthy enough and not ready, I would say please do not impose a new energy code on the business community because we're not healthy enough right now. And so for Rick's comments, while we agree that climate change needs to be addressed, we do not agree that it is the best interest of Louisville to adopt the commercial energy code. We don't know that we'll achieve significant energy savings, but we do know that it will have severe negative impact on the Louisville businesses and in turn the Louisville residents. Most of Louisville's businesses are small. They are not corporate giants. They're places like the Singing Cook, Acme Fine Goods, Tilt Pinball, Crystal Springs, and our small businesses, we're not aspiring to become McDonald's or Budweiser's. We just want to stay here in the community and stay small businesses. So if you choose to adopt the code, please keep in mind the need to foster those small businesses or we'll lose the character of the city. We would prefer that the council act simultaneously with the regional cohort rather than unilaterally. Our concern is that the additional time, costs, and general hassle of dealing with the energy code and permits for new or expanding businesses will drive those businesses to surrounding communities, such as Erie, Lafayette, Longmont, and Broomfield. These communities are already actively soliciting our businesses to relocate, and having Louisville unilaterally make it harder for businesses to operate here will provide a push to relocate elsewhere, inconveniencing our residents, leading to additional transportation energy use, and of course, tax revenues. If the city does go ahead without the cohort, please consider the following. What triggers the requirement to comply with the new code? Applying it only to new buildings over a certain size on new lots would avoid most small business issues. The adoption of a ban on natural gas would be disastrous for a substantial number of businesses, such as restaurants, breweries, coffee roasters, food processors, hospitals, laboratories, clinics, medical and other research facilities, among many others. We've heard that historic structures will be exempt. With some exemptions to the exemptions, historic structures should just be exempt. We have an astonishing number of vacant buildings in the city, and if the insulation and mechanical system requirements of the code are applied to these vacant buildings, many of which would likely be occupied by new uses, the cost of the energy improvements would very likely result in the buildings remaining vacant. One of the consultant reports suggests that a 25% increase in floor space should trigger the use of the new code. But for a small business, 25% of a small space is a very small space, and so this trigger should just be stated as a specific number of square feet. Rick also noted that it's exceedingly bad time for the businesses for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. I won't go through those again. And the DBA previously sent a large number of questions to the city concerning the code and its applicability. Many of these questions remain unanswered. While we can agree that the global warming is a major problem, this energy code and this city at this time will not solve it, and its adoption would be bad for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Iona.
Hi, y'all. My name is Iona Carney, and I'm here on behalf of the Louisville Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. I submitted a letter to City Council in which Mayor Stolzman replied, thank you so much, but I wanted to read it here again as I'm not sure it made it into the packet in time. Mayor and members of City Council, we, the Louisville Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, are providing feedback on the proposed commercial building energy code changes. First of all, thank you to the City of Louisville as well as Lotus and Group 14 for taking the time to put together this proposal, gather community feedback, and answer our initial questions. We want to make it clear that as a board and an organization, we are not against green practice and progress towards the city's energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction goals. Many of our members have actively made and are in the process of making their businesses more sustainable and environmentally friendly. However, some of our membership has voiced concerns about the proposed commercial building code changes, and we are advocating on their behalf. We have discovered some unanswered questions, and we would ask that the city staff and council respond to the following items in advance of the first reading. Number one, What are the triggers that would mean an existing business would have to comply with a new commercial energy code? I know potential triggers have been discussed, but what are the actual triggers that will be? Number 2, which businesses would be exempt? We have heard that certain businesses probably will be exempt, but what is probably and how long will their exemptions last? Number 3, have you considered incentives to support any required changes? What would they look like? Number 4, there is concern that these codes may prevent new business, both small and large, from wanting to open in Louisville. Does the city have a plan of action for filling the current vacant lots and reaching out to prospective businesses if this code update is approved? Furthermore, it seems these changes are more directed towards large projects like Red Tail Ridge, but may impact other large lots like the recently vacant Lowe's. How will the city ensure these code changes do not drive businesses looking to potentially relocate to Louisville away to neighboring cities? Number 5, there is concern with these changes that landlords could increase rent substantially or just sit back and not upgrade when needed to avoid additional extensive compliance costs. What plan does the city have to combat either of these from happening? As a board, we would like to suggest research into an alternative model where there are incentives, not penalties, to make your business more energy efficient. This would create more of a draw for new and existing businesses to make changes without scaring businesses away from entering or remaining in the market. The Louisville Green Energy Program would be a fantastic outline for this type of model. This would still ensure Louisville is a leader among Colorado communities and the cohort without putting more economic strain on current and potential businesses. Finally, we are concerned the city needs to share these proposals more widely to gather meaningful feedback, specifically from businesses. It seems we don't actually know all of the effects this may have on different businesses, and we feel further outreach is required. The community survey was a great start, but only 21% of responses were from businesses versus homeowners and residents. But businesses are the ones who are most affected by these changes. Overall, we, on behalf of our members, are looking for more detailed information and responses to the items above. Once we have that information, we will distribute to our membership to understand how many businesses this may impact, what those potential impacts are,
Thank
and
you so
provide
much.
that feedback to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have the phone number ending in 5285. You look like you're muted on your end. If you could dial *8, it might unmute you. It might be *6. Well, there we go.
Ms. Mayor and Council,
We can hear you now.
hello, Mike Jaborski, 601 Pine Street, Louisville here, of course. I attended one of the meetings and found it kind of interesting that I was the only business operator, I believe, in the room. And so I truly believe that the public outreach could be done in a better fashion or more extensive fashion to include more members of the business community. I myself recently had a energy audit to some extent done on my 60-year-old building, being the third oldest business in town and the first oldest business in town that actually produces a product. So I'm kind of very much embracing the concept of making my business very much more energy efficient. Not just from a cost standpoint, but the ecological and environmental impact side as well. I would embrace more of a carrot approach than the stick or what I'd consider a hammer in this situation. And I'd love to see our sustainability director maybe bring some tools down and some incentives for us to be able to take advantage, because I'm sure they're out there, but there's just not a means of attaining that for a small businessman that pretty much carries the same schedule that our city council does. And very much, I appreciate you doing that. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Rick Cron.
All right. Am I unmuted yet?
We can hear you.
Thank you. This is Rick Cron. I'm the president of the Downtown Business Association. I've been a resident of Louisville since 1987 at 746 West Fur Court. First, I'd like to state that the DBA supports the Chamber of Commerce's letter, which I believe has been well considered and well put together. I'd like to go back to Rob Zaccaro's introduction, and that the staff has basically asked you for 4 things. First, which of the 3 pathways would be the one to choose? And he noted that there could be more. I would like to suggest a fourth pathway to participate and monitor the regional cohort, answer the questions that have been pressed to the city, take action only after the regional cohort has taken action, and as Mr. Dvorsky just suggested, develop some carrots to assist in the completion of these improvements. Second, Rob had asked for exemption discussions for certain industries. In particular, whether the whole industry or just process loads ought to be exempt. I would suggest the entire industry to make it a simpler process. And I think you have had that list several times: restaurants, hospitals, food processing, industrial uses, historic buildings, and a number of others that have been provided to you previously. Third, he mentioned the applicability of the code, asking whether it should be new construction only or also building additions and renovations. I think by far this is a new construction only question, should not apply to those previous buildings due to cost and practicality. It's just not going to work. However, for new construction, more power to you. Number 4 is whether it should be all electric construction. This is basically the appendix CC question, I think, on the use of natural gas. I think that the elimination of natural gas has got an enormous number of problems for many businesses, and furthermore is not even recommended by Excel, partly because you need backup power, in particular generators, in case of losing electricity, as we did during the Marshall Fire in some areas. Let's see, if you stick with only 3 options, follow the staff recommendation. However, I believe there's a better 4th option, which is to wait and see what happens with the cohort and follow that lead, as mentioned previously. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Next, we have Tiffany Boyd.
Good evening, Tiffany Boyd. I live at 550 Grant Avenue. Again, thank you to council members for serving our community in these crazy times of fires and pandemics and climate change. Thank you for the hours and hours. As I was looking through the packet myself, wow, this was a very long packet, though. Thank you so much to everything that you all are doing. I'm here to encourage you tonight to vote yes to strengthen our city's policy on commercial and multifamily dwelling energy codes. I encourage you to pursue the energy performance standard option. That's going to result in much more efficient buildings for us. Regardless of your vote tonight, obviously the regional alignment on the energy codes is here, and we need to continue to support the City of Louisville's participation in that phase 2 of the regional cohort. The cohort is going to bring a lot of our neighboring municipalities together in our best practices, and so we will have cohesive decisions on improving our building efficiency, and also the importance of expanding energy storage, which was just mentioned, and also demand response, which is a big issue that we all need to really be putting much more time and energy and thought into now. Speaking of regional alignment with energy codes, the statewide benchmarking already mandates that Energy Star Portfolio Manager is used in buildings that are 20 to 25,000 square foot or bigger. And this policy is soon going to become mandatory for commercial buildings with less square footage. So if we vote yes tonight and we align ourselves with the energy performance standards, Louisville will have a jump start on ensuring that our commercial and multifamily buildings are well on the way of meeting these benchmarks, which are coming from the state. Colorado's energy roadmap is going to be bringing all communities to this level of climate action. The longer we wait, the more emissions we put into the atmosphere, the more our temperatures will rise. I encourage you tonight to vote yes and to choose the energy performance standard. I think that there needs to be some clarification during discussion around some good points that Mark and other people have brought up. I think there's a lot of misconceptions from existing businesses that are really, really reacting to a lot of these things that have been proposed for new construction. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions that need to be cleared up tonight in order for us all to move forward together in a great way for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Joshua Cooperman.
Josh Cooperman. I live at 216 Griffith Street in Louisville. I am generally supportive of strengthening the city's building codes for both commercial and residential building. And my motivation is the urgency of mitigating climate change. And I think that strengthening building codes is one of the most robust ways that we can mitigate climate change, especially at the municipal level in Colorado. I'd like to say that I favor the performance standard based on energy use intensity, which was presented as option 1. If we go that route, I think we will get better performing buildings, which I think is better than offsetting with renewable energy credits or something like that. The performance-based standard is also easy to update. And I would suggest, one option would be basically to set those numbers, those performance-based standards, sort of just ahead of the 2021 IECC. And then at future points, we can always reduce those numbers and ask for better buildings. And as it was noted, that system has been used in Boulder for a while, and it seems like it works for them at least. Okay. I'm also very supportive of electrification requirements with limited exemptions. As was noted earlier, if we go with the performance-based standard, it might not be necessary to require electrification because, generally speaking, going all electric would be an easier way to meet those standards. I'm also very supportive of the city's continued participation in the regional code cohort. It would, of course, be best if building codes were updated regionally. The issue is that with the cohort, there are no binding commitments at all associated with that collaboration. So, I think it would be reasonable, since they're supposed to report in December, to maybe wait and see what they come up with in December. But again, after that report, there's nothing that anyone has to do, right? We all get to decide what we want to adopt from that point on. I also think that if Louisville pushes ahead, we could really inform the work that the cohort is doing. All right. I'd like to make 2 final remarks. First, I'd just like to remind City Council that when it last considered Red Tail Ridge, the council was very supportive of more stringent building codes for all the development that will be going on there, or that might or will, or who knows, go on there. And so if we're in favor of stringent codes down there, I don't see why we wouldn't also apply them to other new builds. Finally, I'd just like to say the consultants also looked at all electric options for single-family residences, although they didn't report on that. I think that one is sort of a no-brainer. So if we have a moment to consider that, I would go for all electric for new residential. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all the comments. Any council discussion or direction on this topic tonight? Everyone's slow. I guess I'll start. I feel fairly passionately about this topic, and I'm sorry if it comes through. There's an urgency at which I don't feel like we are responding to the climate emergency, and it gets worse every day, literally. When you look at the climate reports from scientists, that work in the federal government, just right in Boulder, and even international ones, there are alarms going off that really underscore the urgency, and that's what brings such a, I don't know, maybe it's a frustration to this work for me or passion, but it's just something I care very deeply about, because the longer we defer and delay on taking climate action, the worse it gets for future generations, and the more mitigations and engineering they'll have to do. Even if you just look at simple climate alarms like species loss, temperature rise, things that are just really critical to humanity on the planet, we're in a very dire situation. And so I'm not trying to be dramatic, and I'm not trying to get angry or frustrated, but I just do not see the urgency. When I hear people say, I care about the environment, but I'm going to vote against everything, I just hear the tragedy of the comments. And it's frustrating to me. And nobody wants to go first. We'll let someone else do this. I've heard this my whole life. And it's not 1990 anymore. It's 2022. And this is the last decade we can take action and make significant change before things really do just come down to engineering and just systems change. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not trying to not listen. I absolutely am trying to listen, but there's an urgency of which this work speaks to me that I have a hard time not bringing to the table. So that's where I'm coming from. So I should have sat by Chris Lay this meeting so he could pass me the note that says "Be cool," but he's all the way down there, so it didn't make it over to me. So with that little preamble, I just want to say the highest emissions that we have in our area are from transportation and from buildings. Like those two areas are going to go back and forth. And there were some questions, this evening brought up around how will we know what Excel is going to do? Well, we know what Excel is going to do because we're partners with Excel. And they have both regulatory requirements on what they have to do over the next several decades, and then they also have additional goals. And they are going to be at 87% carbon-free electricity by 2030. They'll probably beat that number, but they will be at that number. And so I understand why people are saying, well, look at what could happen or look at what might happen, but we know what will happen with our utility because it's regulated and we're part of the regulatory framework around it and we're good partners with them. So while I understand on a national level why people want to bring up arguments around coal and electricity and power plants, and they're absolutely relevant on a global scale or national scale, we have to look at what our system is and where we are. So we'll be at 87% carbon-free electricity by 2030 with the Excel system. And they're really pushing to be further, and they have pretty aggressive goals for 2050 to get even lower, close to zero, if not zero, by using hydrogen and by using more renewables. And so it's great to look at what they're doing and what some of the technology changes they're making are, but with today's technology, they'll be at that 87%. So it'll be much cleaner by 2030. And I guess another thing I just want to say in sort of the preamble part of this, so the emissions from buildings is huge. That's like your energy, your heating, your electricity. That's a huge segment that we have here in Louisville, and transportation is another one. And people are shifting their transportation emissions to charge their cars at home. So there'll be even more on the building side. So there's that shift there, all the more reason to clean our building emissions, right? As they get the trifecta of transportation, electricity, and heating, all with the utility. So we really have to clean our utility. I'm not underestimating that, but there is effort in that area that is so much more substantial than anything we're doing in the building area. So it's like, okay, so where do we pick up our slack? In this conversation that we've had, the majority of the feedback that I've gotten, not all, I've gotten some feedback that does not fall into this category, but the majority that I've gotten is based on information that's just inaccurate. So that's interesting feedback, but not necessarily useful feedback. So from my perspective, when council set out on this, it was really around new buildings. We have many acres of undeveloped land. And we have had some pretty significant land use hearings where everybody on council was very supportive of going all electric and having renewable sources on those very big parcels. But there was a difference of opinion on whether that should be required through a PUD process or a GDP process, or if we should change our building codes. And so I do feel like there was consensus that we should do it, but I feel like people had different process ideas on how we should do it. So that's how I believe we have arrived here, is that, to try to get everybody to the same place was that in these new buildings, we're gonna change our codes so they apply to every new building, and it'll be fair, and we won't do it through a GDP process. So I get that people are afraid and have different information, but we can lay out whatever code we want. And so I feel like it's really useful to say what you do want and not things that you heard that aren't accurate at all about what's happening. And just on that inaccuracy page, so even tonight, there were things flashed up on the screen that I just feel like are inaccurate, and I don't feel like we're correcting each other when we hear things that are inaccurate, because we've all gotten so tired between social media and the pandemic and everything. So I'll just correct a few things, and these are just from my perception, things that came up tonight that I have different information that makes me think that what was presented was not accurate. So for example, I can go with any of you tomorrow to Cinnabar and watch Bros, because it's a movie theater we have in town, and it's occupied by someone who's showing movies there. It is not vacant. So I look forward to seeing you all at the movie theater tomorrow. That's just one minor thing. There are several others, but it's just it's hard because, right, you're flashed with information constantly, and it's not all accurate. And so how you distill the accurate pieces and the inaccurate pieces, it's hard, and we just have to talk to each other and say well, I don't understand what you're saying, and I do understand what you're saying, so we can get somewhere productive. Let's see, my last misinformation piece. The part, and one other part of why this is really important from my perspective, and that I don't feel like I've heard from people, is that if you look at the state roadmap and if you look at what the state and county are doing, retrofits are coming. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what I think any of us want to do tonight. But in the next period of time, retrofits are coming. And so if we keep building new buildings with 30-year-old technology, that will be much more expensive for those building owners than just building it right the first time. So I feel like it's like, hey, let's build these right the first time. Let's not have people put new buildings in and then next year tell them, guess what, you have to retrofit. And every time I hear people say, let's have incentive programs, I say, great, will you support the tax measure to pay for the incentive program? Because the government isn't funded with magic money, it's funded with all of our collective money. And so we don't just have money to provide incentives, we have to actually collect taxes from one another to provide incentives. So sure, we can do an incentive program. Will you help me pass a tax measure so we can do the incentive program? And then you say to yourself, well, we might as well then just pay for it ourselves because you're taxing us to give ourselves back the money. So I just struggled with that a little bit tonight too. And I'll just add one more personal piece. I don't know if you guys read political comics ever, but I follow Peter Cooper's comics, and they're getting darker and darker and darker around the climate. I don't know if you all have been reading them in the morning, but it's just, if you want to understand the urgency that different people are feeling, start following Cooper's political comments. I'm not quite done, sorry. I'll get to a point in a second. So I think there's a bunch of pathways that are all great and we could improve on what we have from where we are tonight. So I could go with option 1 with modifications or option 2 with modifications, and I think we just need to work through what any of those are, and I think by talking through the specific details we can get there. So with option 1, I think I could probably get there if we add in an all-electric requirement on it, and that's probably where I'll stop for my comments, but I have more. And then for option 2, I would want to modify the net zero code in section 103.3.1 in the qualifying offset to just in the base 0 year calculate the renewable standard of the electric utility. It would substantially change the bar graph of the cost. If you calculated the renewable standard that Excel has in that year and calculated that in the offset calculation, it would just substantially change the amount of PV you had to have onsite or offsite. So that would be a direction I would want to go. In any case, I'm very much in favor of adding in all electric. If you look at the different cities that are leading in this area, they're very cold places. That's why I brought up Crested Butte. It wasn't by accident. I brought it up not because it's small or anything, but just because it's so cold, so people would realize in very cold places they can do this too. And I'd be interested to hear the specific exemptions people would like to bring up. And I just think we should have a lot more detailed conversations around the specific exemptions so that they're based in like factual trade-offs and not perceptions around what we need. So I would like to hear exactly which unit operation people feel is not available in an alternative electricity. I brew beer at home and it's all electric, so I'll make you all some all electrically brewed beer for Hanukkah. Councilmember Lay.
Just point of information, can we take a break?
Yes, sorry, I was gonna say at 8 o'clock and then I just looked up and it's 8:33.
Well, we started a little late, so.
Yeah, are there any other pressing things? I just feel like now that I've given my 2 cents. Are people okay taking a 10-minute break? Good, I see a lot of nodding, great. I'll repeat what I said when we get back. It's 8:33, we'll be back at 8:43. All right, thank you. Welcome back. All right, so welcome back. So we're to council discussion and comments, which gave me time to look through my notes and realize the things I wasn't able to cover. So thanks, Councilmember Lay. So just one other point. People talked a lot about incentives. The Chamber of Commerce brought up incentives, and another commenter brought up incentives. And I actually hear from tenants of a lot of our landowner buildings all the time that they wish that they could have on-site solar and that they could have better insulation and things like that, but their landlords aren't willing to put it in. And the problem is the incentives really are for the landlord. The way we have this incentive program set up, it's a split incentive. So the tenant really pays the bill, but the landowner has to put in the capital. So the landowner doesn't get the return on investment, so they don't want to put it in because they're not paying the utility bill. So there's this problem right now. And so I do think that there's some big benefit from the option 2 just in that sense, because I've heard from many of our industrial tenants that they would love to have higher efficiency buildings and they would love to have on-site solar, but they are not afforded that option from their landlord. So I think that's a really good point about how the incentives that we have right now are actually not yielding the outcomes that we want, even though they're available. Other folks have comments? Everyone. Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a fantastic report. Appreciate all the effort, and the presentation was top-notch. Appreciate all that, and it's super complicated. I think my belief is we have a shared goal as a community, as a council staff. Like, I think the voices of the environment isn't important, or climate change isn't real, are very minimal, and we've seen that with like the surveys after the fire that our community believes that we're in a climate crisis. Our community believes that we need to do something now, and that we need to be really thinking about what we can do as individuals, what we can do as policymakers, what we can do as business owners, as homeowners, all those things. And so, I really believe that we are moving, unavoidably moving in the right direction. And I know there's concern of delay or false promises and things like that. I am confident that we're moving in a really positive direction. Exhibit A, we were one of the first communities in this cohort to pass the 2021 IECC, and that's fantastic. And that's what we're asking all the members of that cohort to do, is pass that. And some people are lagging behind us, and that's, again, those false promises of like, hey, you said you're gonna do this, let's do this. Like, yeah, we're doing it next year, maybe 2023, 2024. Like, yeah, but hey, if we're gonna move together, you gotta move with us, right? And some are maybe a little in front of us, and City of Boulder might be an example of that. Crested Butte's not in our cohort, but an example of someone who's maybe in front of us, right? And so I think what's really important is, we need to keep pushing this every day, every year, and making this better and better and better. And I really like some of the cohort goals. I can't pretend to be myself a part of that cohort and the things they're doing, but I appreciate the direction that the cohort is leading the area, and I wish everyone was moving as quickly as we've moved. Where we move further in the next month is certainly what the question is, right? Are we going to continue to kind of lead the way here? Are we going to do lockstep with other people, or are we going to slow down and wait for others to catch up? And I think that last one would be pretty infuriating for pretty much everyone on this board, or this council, would be to say, okay, well, we'll slow down and wait for you. Like, we want to keep going. So, I think one thing that gets me with a lot of these things is, what is the goal? And, for me, what I was saying is that, I would feel like we are successful if the most environmentally friendly building is constructed in Louisville next year. It's net zero, it's awesome, it's all electric, it's just an absolute feather in the cap of environmental construction. And that's what I would like to see, is that building built in Louisville. And so the question is, how do we get there? One way, obviously, is to mandate that and to say that that's what you have to build, and then the right company will come along and they'll build that, and that's what we'll get. And that might happen this summer, that might happen next year, that might take 5 years, but that's the only building that we're willing to see built. And so we're gonna put a policy out there that says, that's what we want, and if it's not that, you can't come. And then that sends a definite signal that that is the number one priority, is that without that, you cannot come. And so, you know, I could actually, there's a part of me that could get behind that. I think the more global frustration for me is if we take that action without the cohort, or without support from a region or even the state, you know, again, my concern is that nothing gets built here, but that same building gets built a neighborhood over to a lower standard. And that we didn't accomplish the thing we were trying to accomplish, which is to have that great building built in Louisville. And so we can look at it as a win to not have anything built if it isn't to the standard that we think it needs to be at. And we'll wait and we'll be patient. I really think that's a reasonable perspective, is that it's too important to buckle on that at all. Personally, I feel like being in the front of the pack and keeping on moving with the front of the pack and taking these steps every year, new codes every 2 years, new steps, the suggestion of, you know, maybe option 1 with the EUIs of specific quantities that you can then tick up each year. And again, it doesn't mean like the building you built last year now has to change. It means now when you're building in 2024, it's a little better. Now when you're building in 2025, it's a little better. Now by the time you're building in 2030, it's net zero. That's where we've gotten with the technology, with the ability, and with the buildings. So I like that unwavering progress towards net zero that the cohort is pointing us towards. So I'm excited about that. I agree with the mayor. I've had 30 conversations telling people the same thing, like, this doesn't apply to you. This isn't about you. And I cannot get that through to people. And so what I hear us saying right now is we're talking about new buildings. We're talking about a space that's dirt right now and someone wants to put a building on it. And what is that building gonna look like? We are not talking about our current buildings. And again, it's so hard. It's like, we just can't help ourselves, right, Mayor? Like, we might be talking about our current buildings some other time, like, and I know that's scary, but we're not talking about that right now. That isn't the conversation. We're talking about new buildings. And I can't imagine in 2023 building a brand new building and not having it be state-of-the-art environmental. How on earth are you gonna build a brand new building tomorrow and it isn't core and shell, right? The structure, the power, the water, the heating. How would you not, in this day and age, build that? And I think it's necessary that people come with the best possible core and shell buildings. And I think we differ on some of the details of whether or not they can have natural gas for use, whether they can have natural gas for backup power, whether they can have alternative energy sources for those things. And I think what we did in the Red Tail Ridge GDP last year was to say, you've got to be electric only and electrified everywhere, but you can bring gas to the site for backup power and for use within the building if deemed necessary. And that's a harder question. And I know, there's some of us that really genuinely, understand that it is possible to do things without gas. It is all doable. And then again, it just brings me back to my concern. It is possible, but it's way easier. And so then they don't do it here because it's way easier somewhere else. And so I'm trying to take these steps, and I'm hoping that we move forward. And I'm trying to keep our conversation in the direction of, what we are agreeing on together and what our shared aspirations are, and that we're not challenging our each other's intentions but the strategy to get there. And if we have a shared goal, we can argue like hard on the steps to get there and what is the right course and what is the right path. And we might absolutely disagree on the path forward, but I have not heard anyone who isn't committed to the end goal of getting this community to net zero. And it's just a matter of how and how fast and in what fashion. So I don't even really want to talk about the triggers and the exemptions and the incentive, because we're not talking about existing buildings. So there, right now I'm hearing there aren't triggers. We're not looking to do existing buildings, we're looking to do new buildings. So your existing building won't be triggered, it'll be if you're building a new building, that's the trigger. And then the exemptions, I think, is important if we're gonna get to that, of like what uses are exempted or none are exempted, or yes, you know, industry is exempted or other things. And then again, on page 189, my handwriting is awful. The performance targets, you know, they're all blank, they're all question marks, right? Like, what are the EUI targets? Like, that's really important. Like, I'm totally in support of it. Oh my God, that number I'm not in support of. So that's definitely something we need to fill in if we head in that direction, which I could support. So I think that's it for me. I appreciate you allowing me to go on.
Thank you, Councilor Dickinson. Councilor Most.
Thank you. So I just want to sprinkle in a quote. I've been helping my daughter with all of her college applications, so I've been doing a lot of quote searching. I just want to say really simply, if not us, who, and if not now, when? You know, we've spent the last 40 years not doing what we needed to do. And so now our children and our grandchildren are going to pay the price. And even if we adopt the most stringent codes across the United States tomorrow, our kids and our grandkids are still going to pay the price. Climate disaster is here to stay. And while we've had some pretty bad trauma in Colorado, I encourage you to go to look and see what just happened in Pakistan. This is not something that we can pontificate about and argue about and act as if we have days and months and years to sort out this problem. It is an emergency. It is a clear and present danger, and we have to act. And I am a strategic business consultant, and I would say that two things. One, if you want to operate, you want to begin a new business, you want to open a new business, you want to build a new building in 2022, it needs to be built to the highest environmental standards. And if you can't afford to do that, then I would argue that you can't afford to run your business. And again, we're not talking about existing businesses right now. I appreciate Councilmember Dickinson's comments, although I do think we do need some triggers. Excuse me, but if you can't afford to build a building like this, you shouldn't build a building, period. And I would argue that from a business perspective, something that I'm always talking to my clients about is you have to decide whose business you want, who you want to target. And my position would be that by taking a leadership position in creating really green standards, that what we're saying is those are the businesses we want to come to Louisville. In fact, we should be going out and seeking out businesses that want to be in a community that is fostering the highest possible environmental standards. And trust me, there are a lot of businesses out there that are doing that. So I look at it as, how are we going to position ourselves out into the world? And who do we want to attract? What businesses do we want to identify and prioritize to come to our community, right? We should be doing this proactively. And when I think about, I sit on the Economic Vitality Committee with Council members Dickinson and Fahey, and I believe that we need to get much more aggressive about bringing business into Louisville, but it needs to be the kind of business we want to have in Louisville. Whether that's from an environmental standpoint or a value standpoint, that's part of what we should be doing as a community, representing the values of our community. That includes who we do business with, who we bring into our community, who we're really seeking out. So I think we have a responsibility. Excuse me, shouldn't have eaten those potato chips. And I just want to, following up to some of the comments that Mayor Stolzman made, our vacancy rate is okay. We look at our vacancy rate on a regular basis in the Economic Vitality Committee, and it's not 0, but it's not 25%. We have a few big buildings that are sort of kind of in everyone's faces that we haven't filled right now, but my understanding is Kohl's is on its way. And I think that, it kind of, and I think it misrepresents the state of our community. Our sales tax revenue is actually doing really well. It's better. Our sales tax revenues are going up. They're not going down. And yes, some of that is due to the internet. God bless the internet. I'm a single mother. I do my shopping on the internet. It's fantastic. I love it when that sales tax comes into Louisville. But I just think we have to be having a conversation that's based in the actual facts of what is going on in our community. And I think, Councilmember Dickinson said he's had 30 conversations with people. I mean, it's important that we are making decisions based on the reality of our situation. And I personally believe that one of the wonderful things about Louisville, is that it's this great community, and being a beacon for having the most energy efficient buildings in the county, in the state, in the country, that is a attraction mechanism that we can leverage the heck out of. And that's how I think we need to take this on. Instead of taking this position, oh my God, people aren't going to want to come here. Well, some businesses may not want to come here. But there's a whole bunch of businesses out there that are literally looking for that opportunity. And I say we champion that, and we provide that opportunity, and we aggressively bring those kind of businesses into our community.
Councilmember Lay. Oh, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. So I appreciate the comments from my colleagues here. I want to direct us back to Director Siccaro's sort of 4 things that he needs from us tonight. I certainly favor pathway number 2. I think that all electric, with the way that the grid is going and sort of the decarbonization that is happening, or as it moves towards decarbonized grid, that's the way that we should be going, and it's the way that we should be, challenging our community to go. I think it's constantly, I think about the way that the sort of the environmental movement in the United States has happened, right? None of these. It's nice to talk about incentives, and it's nice to talk about. To believe that people will do the right thing. But at the end of the day, we have building codes for a reason. We have building codes because they're the right thing to do, whether for safety or for others. And so in this particular case, I think a requirement is important. I'd be interested to talk about exemptions. I'm not. What I think I was very disappointed, while I think the consultant's presentation was good in many respects, what I did not see was a lot of specific evidence for specific exemptions. Even the example that the consultants raised about restaurants, I think they undermined their own argument, and that was really the only specific example that they could come up with. I think that what that particular conversation showed to me was that even our own consultants have fallen into the same trap that we often fall into, which is this trade-off, this false choice that we are forced to make, that we can either have jobs and businesses or we can have a clean environment. And I do not accept that false choice. I think when it comes to is this something for new construction only? I agree with Councilmember Dickinson that is true. I think we are clearly only talking about new construction. So, I noticed that some of the commenters talked about Main Street businesses, businesses that I'm not aware of their interest in expanding their space. Clearly, I think it would not apply to those businesses. And then I already answered the question about all electric. So I think that for me, the great, getting back to sort of that great building that Councilmember Dickinson was talking about, I also want that built in Louisville. And my belief is that without requirements, without pushing our community and pushing the market from a regulatory perspective, we will never get there. We will continue to operate at the lowest common denominator. Not everyone will do that, but many will.
Any other comments tonight? Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I agree in general with almost all of the comments that have been made this evening. The climate crisis is real. It is happening, and it's getting worse every single day. And it's not going to get better until everyone steps on board and does what they can. I don't believe that we're talking about existing small businesses in town. We're only discussing new construction. Or I think something was also mentioned about businesses that are expanding more than 50% of their square footage. I don't know if that was something that was considered or not, but I would be in favor of all electric for new construction with, I will say, a couple of exemptions, and the major one being hospitals. There are just so many things that a facility like that needs to have, and to have the backup power, and to have different processing abilities, laboratories, space, things like that, that can't always be provided by electricity. So I would go for exemptions for hospitals and maybe a couple other industrial uses. But other than that, I would like new construction to be all electric. Thank you.
Other comments from folks? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the commenters said just to say yes. And, I think since I've been on council, we've had a sustainability board, we have a sustainability action plan. And from this very dais, many times I've talked about reducing greenhouse gases. So, I think we're all faced the same direction. It's a matter of how quickly we take steps forward. And so that's really what we're talking about, is the pace. So I think it's important to say that we are all pulling rope on the same end. It's just how quickly we should be doing that. I find a lot of comfort in the cohort idea. I wish that was expanded and that was more statewide. I wish we weren't dealing with Arapahoe County and some of these other counties that may have less interest in some of these, and then we would be doing something in a way that has, so that we're not worried about a business that might want to build in the Denver area somewhere, but they're going to choose where it's less stringent on certain things. And but regardless of that, I think the cohort concept is good. One thing I don't know, City Manager, who are our representatives at the cohort? Okay, so Kayla is our representative. Are there any elected officials or like that part of that group, or is it just?
It's typically sustainability coordinators, and some municipalities have planning and building staff.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for participating in that. I think it's very important, but I wish it was, it was broader. As I'm looking at the paths, and Councilor Fahey brought up something about these newer buildings. When we talked about Red Tail a year ago, we had done amendments that suggested that the HVAC systems for those would be all electric. And, that's something that is beyond our code today. That is something, and you mentioned buildings and transportation being the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases. That's a start. That's a significant start. I think that's what you were saying. Okay, so I just wanted to get a point of clarification, because I think that we're still, although there are I guess there are some ovens and so forth in some restaurants. There's one vendor. Wait a minute, Anna said that. they don't have choices. It's not like they have 50 choices of different models and shapes and sizes. They have, a limited number. And what I'm looking for is that growing quickly, so that as a restaurant opens, as a brewery opens, they have options for doing things in a different way. I'm just a little concerned that we would be getting ahead of that curve. And I'm not comfortable saying that we're going to be so far ahead of the curve that we don't have that building for 1, 3, or 5 years or whatever it is. So, but I do like the idea of the electric HVAC as being something we might consider over time. And just because the cohort is moving in a certain phase, we may want to do things that are quicker than that, and Kayla can let us know where those things are at. So I always want us to be looking for those options, because I do think it's important for us to be business friendly. And although I'd like to have a perfect building, the only thing we built, I think we need to go at a pace that makes sense. Exemptions, I think we should probably talk about that. Ability to new construction was one of the questions. No question in my mind about new construction. The question comes down is, is there a 25% trigger, those kind of things. I think that's something I'd need to understand. One of the concerns I have is we have multi-tenant buildings that are built in places like the CTC. So if that gets expanded, how does that affect all the tenants in the building? I don't know the answer. Somebody probably has an answer to that. I don't. But at the end of the day, to me, we need to balance our sustainability goals, which I very much support, with the economic vitality and sustainability of our city. I do like the cohort approach with some potential discussion around other things. And there are exemptions on things. I don't know how you do them today, like backup power for, especially, I think about in my role at the university, I mean, we had a supercomputing facility that took a gigawatt of power, and so we had to have a backup system. It's really difficult to have a bank of batteries to be able to back that up, for example. So there are some challenges in certain areas, and there may be solutions, but I don't know what they all are. But at this point in time, I guess the code option that I support is the cohort. Thank you.
So just kind of summarize what I've heard so far as consensus for staff to bring back, and that way the conversation can kind of go around if there's anything I've misheard. So it sounds like there's general consensus for heating and cooling to be all electric in the code that gets brought back. And then, do you want me to not summarize until you get a chance? Sorry, Councilmember Lay. I was just trying to summarize what I'd heard so far, so we didn't have to re-go through them if we were all on the same page. Go ahead.
Yeah. One question I had, though, for you was a procedural one, which is, I've noticed there's one person who's got their hand raised. Are we going to is there going to be another round of comments? Or
So we're through public comment this evening, but this topic is coming back multiple more times. So like the staff will take whatever feedback we give and continue to work on it, and we'll have additional, but the public comment period for tonight is over.
Okay. May I? Okay, thanks. I don't know whether I'm going to move the needle or need to or what, but I also, I guess, want to first thank my colleagues, because the comments that have been made tonight are all very good. Mayor, I know how, because I've heard you speak about this for a long time, how important this is to you. I mean, it's important to, I think it's important to all of us. I think it's important to all of us in Louisville, and business and residents alike, with some exceptions always, but not many, not many. And so, I think you have probably, it's no great feat to say, or great, I'm not stepping out on a limb to say that I think you know more about these issues than anybody on council, because I think you've studied them a long time. And the background that you have, the engineering background, has been helpful to all of us. And, you know, Councilmember Most, the passion that you bring to this, I think I appreciate thinking about these issues in multi-generational terms because we have to. Because, I've got kids that worry about this stuff and that teach this stuff. Councilmember Fahey's has been preaching this to us for how many years? At the beginning of every meeting that I ever attended, and before she was on council and since. And I appreciate those comments and the comments of Councilmember Brown and Mayor Pro Tem and Caleb as well. And I do think that there are a lot of things that we agree on. One of the things I went back and really sifted through the Lotus report, and there's one part of it that I think is worth quoting. I guess it's on page, I want to say 10 of the packet that we have, but a common framework used to create more effective sustainability strategies is consideration of the 3 pillars of sustainability: economy, environment, and equity. Creating a more sustainable Louisville requires consideration of the whole community, not just environmental impacts of the action being done. Recognizing this, the project team used the 3 pillars as guiding principles throughout this work. I think that's apparent in the hard work that they've done and the hard work that people who came to the meetings and who participated in the online survey, and certainly the staff work, which has been astonishing, and council work, because it's all been pretty hard. We've talked about our goals and stuff, but going back to the original, at least one of our resolutions, which was Resolution 25, Series 2019. 2 of the goals, there were 2 that were specifically municipality related, our own city public goals. But 2 of the goals I think that are critical are generate 75% of Louisville's residential and commercial / industrial electric needs from carbon-free sources by 2030, and reduce core community greenhouse gas emissions annually below the 2016 baseline through 2030. So, and we've reaffirmed those on a number of times. I think that the question is really much more, what's the time frame and what are the tactics we're going to use to get to where we're going to go? And I think the country, the globe is in a crisis, and we can't just simply sit around and wait for everybody else to do what we need to do. We have a role to play. The question is, how do we do that? And I think, like everybody else, I think the cohort idea is important. That's why DOLA gave us all the money to put this together, and I think that that's important. I think it's important to recognize that without anything further, we're still at the 2021 IAEC commercial code, and that is nothing to sneeze at. It means that without doing anything more, we're at the leading edge. So I think that needs to be recognized, simply because I think we hear, when we're always hearing about crisis, and it is a crisis, I think it's important to recognize that we're already stepping down that road of being in the leadership group. Now, will we stay there forever if we do nothing? No. But I think it's important that we let folks know that, and we appreciate the commercial community because they're having to already manage under those standards. And that's a really good thing. Something that we could be proud of, maybe not satisfied with, but at least proud that we're that far. And all of the folks on this, on our dais have had something to do with that, putting that where it is. So I am, I'm a little torn. I mean, I've got to say that I know that our community, we can't, we represent the whole community, but we have suffered a huge cataclysmic event, climate event, and that's important to recognize, and it's important for us to be able to have the kind of community we want for people to come back to. And I think that one of the things we have to recognize is that we need a pace. We need to pace ourselves about how we do this work. There are, I mean, we can focus on a variety of things, but, you know, I noticed in the report, even with the you know, policy option 1, there are a lot of questions that aren't yet answered. And I realize that we're talking about just trying to select a framework so we don't have to have all the answers, and that we're never going to have all the answers in order to be able to make a decision one way or another. But I mean, there's some fairly significant questions about, and I'm looking on page 19 of the packet, if we choose that option, what targets are the most appropriate? Well, that's a fairly fundamental concern, which is going to affect the businesses in their decisions, whether to locate here, whether to expand. I'm inclined to try to get answers to questions like that and some others before we move too much further. I think if I'm, you know, if our group needs or wants to or is headed toward a policy option, I'm not thrilled about even moving to policy option 1 right now in light of where we are in our community life. And I don't mean to say that it's something that we have to put off. I think it's not a bad time to let others catch up to where we are in the cohort. I don't know why we need to be the leader on all of these efforts when we've got a community that's suffering the way our community is suffering. And it is really important that, yeah, we're doing okay on tax revenue. The reason we're doing really well is because of the online sales. That's a huge part of why we're doing okay. And I am worried about vacancies. And I don't know I understand the rush to try to get something done worldwide. I have a harder time saying Louisville, our community absolutely has to be in the vanguard of that. So I think I would prefer to hold tight until we see some real, actual results from the other communities. They're all in progress. Well, that's great. We don't have, we've got 11 communities, and we've got very few that have actually gotten even to where we are. And that's not, to me, that's a concern. That's an actual, that's a real tangible, empirical problem for our business community. And that's part of what we have to do, because we could do the absolute most climate forward, if we just placed that environmental pillar out there and made that the most important, we could do that. But where are we gonna put our community if we do that? And I worry about that. So at any rate, if I'm somewhere between a hold until we see some more progress from the cohort and the policy option that's recommended. I'm absolutely in favor of keeping it to new buildings, and I am concerned, as I think a lot of folks are concerned, what that means for businesses that are expanding, because that's one of the things we're trying to foster is expansion of businesses. So to what extent, to what extent are we going to tag businesses that are expanding with requirements? I'd like to think that we won't be at all. But I can also see that the way we draft this could end up meaning that a big enough expansion could be viewed as new construction. I'd want to avoid that. That may be a pretty easy thing to do, but I want to make sure that that happens. If we go with one, I think we want to be pretty flexible. I'm to the extent that there are, this option, the policy one allows the city to limit exemptions, but I definitely, that comes up much more when we're talking about, I think, the use of electricity. I want to give as much flexibility to those businesses that really need to be able to use alternate sources of energy, and it's natural gas primarily for, I think, for backup power. And I'm thinking hospital, I'm thinking restaurants, medical research, industrial uses. They're very difficult. They're very difficult to say. We're not going to get those businesses if we say that we're not allowing them to be able to function only on electric. So, and I know the mayor has some thoughts about that. I'm sure that she'll, want to share. But I think it's really important that even if something is a possibility, even if some technology exists somewhere in the world right now, that we not require folks to be able to, or to have to acquire it in a way that makes building absolutely infeasible. And we want to attract new businesses, and we want to keep the businesses that are moving, like the hospital, here in Louisville. So that's what I'd say. Thanks.
Thanks. So I think people will have more comment. I just saw everybody, listening attentively. So thanks for those comments, Councilmember Lay. I guess just one point where I've heard a few of you say something that I feel diametrically opposite of what you've said is that we're leading the way, we're leading the way, we're leading the way. We are right in the middle of the pack with the 2021 code on commercial buildings. Like if you look at the metro area, I was concerned like at the beginning of the year, so I did a presentation for Metro Mayor's Caucus. Everybody's on board, like I'm getting the data, and as I said earlier in the meeting, I'll send that out, but Boulder County's code is ahead of ours, City of Boulder's code is ahead of ours, many, many places are ahead of ours, so we are not at all leading the way. And so to keep repeating that, I think creates this fear and anxiety for people that's totally inaccurate. So that's an area where I've just heard repeatedly in this meeting, something that I just think is inaccurate entirely, and so I would just reiterate that. And so I think we need that data when we come back. It's like which cities are in the act of either have adopted or actively adopting 2021 IECC, and several of them have made amendments that are much more stringent than ours. So I think that's a point where I disagree. And it's just hard for me listening. I feel like sometimes when people hate politicians, it's because they feel like they say something one time to get an outcome and a benefit and win an election, and then a different thing another time. And I feel a little bit like I'm in that category right now, like listening to what people are saying and just feeling like it's very different than the same people in a different conversation. So that's hard. Like, that's just very hard for me. Like, in the conversation on Red Tail Ridge, it just very much felt like people, and at the time it even felt like it was just like an excuse to be able to say, no, we want to do this. We all support the environment. We love the environment. We just want to do it when we update the code. And then when we updated the code in October, it was like, no, we want to do this. We just need 3 months. I promise you, Ashley, we'll bring it back in 1 quarter, 3 months from now. In 3 months from October, we will talk about all electric, and we'll have the data we need to do it, and we will do it. And then, of course, circumstance happened, and so it wasn't 3 months, and now here we are basically a year later having the conversation that started really with Red Tail Ridge or before. So I just feel like people keep saying, oh, no, I would want to do this in these circumstances, but when presented with those circumstances, you didn't really want to do it. So I just would like people to be more honest with themselves, I guess. It just sounds, when I hear some of you talking, I hear you say one thing and just doing something entirely different, so it's very hard for me. It doesn't seem consistent. It seems very politically motivated given whatever circumstances in front of us. And I feel the same way, like several people have brought up the hospital. And you hear that with politicians too, of like, well, it's favoritism, it's like people's cronyism, and it's like, oh, if you have a specific person that you're buddies with, you don't want to do anything that might make it harder for them. And from my perspective, it's like we want the same set of rules that apply to everybody. Whether it's my friend Mark, or whether it's the hospital, or whether it's my next door neighbor or me, it just seems like we should have rules that apply, and then we figure out how to make them work together. And I have brought so many incentives to the community this year that I hope that demonstrates to all of you that I am very serious about my commitment to working to make it work together. And I guess I would be interested to hear what incentives other people have brought to the community this year to match that, like what resources or grants or financial help have other people brought forward. And I just, from another political perspective, really struggle because one of the players that I keep hearing brought up, the hospital time and again, I understand having a hospital is a feather in people's cap, and having access to hospital service is obviously critical, but we're very well served by hospitals in this area. In fact, there were several reports done that showed that they've overbuilt for several of the urgent cares and hospitals, and they're competing, and it's creating a real problem for them because there are so many hospitals in our service area. And so I have a hard time backing a hospital system that doesn't provide access to women's health care across the board. And I don't know that, I hear people up here saying, oh, we've got to do all these things and bend over backwards. Well, let's look at who we're getting in bed with and get serious about it if we're going to have that conversation. So I just have a hard time when I hear people saying we want to do, on one hand, a proclamation saying we care about women, and then on the other hand, we want to back people who maybe their actions don't support that. So I just have struggled with a lot of the things, and I don't know, maybe I've been too frank. But that's how I genuinely feel. So I'm happy to summarize once we all get a chance to go again, and I'll try to listen carefully so I can find where we have consensus on the questions Director Zaccaro has asked us. Councilmember Most?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate some of the points you made. And I have to say this because everybody's promoting the hospital. I'm a single mother by choice. And when I went to Avista Hospital to try to find an OBGYN to help me get pregnant, this woman there started asking me in the women's health clinic about my relationship history. So this is very personal for me. And given what's been going on this summer with the Dobbs decision, and because of my reproductive choices, I feel like it's a personal attack. So I'm not really big on supporting hospitals that don't support women's rights and women's reproductive freedom. So I just really feel compelled to say that because, part of the problem we have in this country right now is way too many of our hospitals are Catholic hospitals. So I will leave that alone where it is, but I'm it's really a bee in my bonnet. And I also want to just follow up and really support what the mayor said, because it's very, very easy to talk about wanting to to be sustainable and to do something about climate change. It's really easy to talk about it. And as my 16-year-old daughter last year told me, it just seems like it's very performative when it actually comes down to doing it. And we have, and I'm the end of the baby boom. I was 61 years old this month. We have screwed up this environment of this planet for our children. We have screwed it up. We have sucked everything out of it. Those of us in my age group and older, we have benefited financially, and we have over and over and over and over again said, well, it's not good for business, so screw it. Excuse my language. But it just makes me really, really, really angry that people are sitting here and saying, oh, it's bad for business. You know what? If there's no water left in Colorado, how's your business gonna run? If the air's so bad you gotta wear a gas mask, how's your business gonna run? I mean, this notion that somehow, and I think Councilmember Brown said it, this straw man argument that we have to choose between business and the environment, and that we always have to choose business ahead of the environment, is just totally, completely unacceptable to me. And I think we have a responsibility, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, to our children and to our grandchildren, to try to clean up some of the mess that those of us in my generation have inflicted upon this planet while we have personally, financially benefited in every way. And it's just unacceptable to me to hear people talk about putting it off, and we're not ready, and we don't want to be first, and it's just not okay. And this is an absolute crisis, and no one is sitting around this community saying, well, we need to think about things when it comes to responding to the Marshall Fire victims, who are victims of climate change, right? And we're all jumping up and down, doing whatever we can to help those people. Okay, this to me is just as serious an emergency, and we should be looking at it just as seriously. And if we don't have the wherewithal to do that, then I don't think we should be sitting up on this dais.
Councilmember Lay?
As a show that I watched as a child used to say, there was a character that would come on and say, you have said a mouthful. I don't know that I can, and I'm not going to respond to except for a couple of things, because they relate very specifically to Louisville. I very much appreciate your views on women's health care. I'd be remiss if I didn't respect those. I do. And in your own experiences. I think it is very important for us to consider the impacts of some of what we do on the hospital that we have and have had for a long time. It's the largest single employer in the city. So, and I don't know that you meant to be so sanguine about whether it should be here or not. I'm not gonna, I can't look into that, but I think it's important to note for businesses to know that we care about them and care about their survival, even if at some point there are some parts of them with which we disagree. So I am concerned about that, and at least for my part, I only speak for myself, that is important to set the record straight, that I think the city cares about its hospital.
Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep things short. I appreciate, I think we're getting a little off topic talking about one specific tenant. So I want to get us back to the issue at hand, which is this particular this particular subject about, exemptions. I am happy to think about exemptions where it is actually not feasible, but we need to have solid evidence that things are not feasible, and not just, I should say, not feasible, but actually prohibitive, right? Just because something is hard doesn't mean that it shouldn't be required. It's hard to, well, anyway. I also want to just say for a moment that, like, I just go back to this old adage that, we should think globally and act locally. And that has been an incredibly successful tool in the variety of important policy making in this country, not the least of which is, getting rid of indoor smoking in restaurants and bars. That's not been led at the national level. That's been led by local communities all across this country. And climate change can be that way too. And when I hear folks saying things like, Louisville doesn't need to be at the beginning of this, or, I'm not going to put Louisville first, we'll wait and see what happens, that's not acting locally, right? So I very much want us to continue to have, I really want to push the market, push our community to, be right by its commitments to sustainability, which is something we hear again and again from our community, and in every poll that we put out, or our citizen survey that we put out, it comes back incredibly important to people. And this is where we can make a significant impact by acting locally.
So let me try to summarize it, because I'll channel Mayor Pro Tem Maloney that was talking about the spirit of everyone being pointed in the same direction and moving in that way. And so I think that I heard general agreement on keeping on the cohort. So we'd like to keep on the cohort. It sounded like there could be potentially consensus around, when it comes back as a code option, having an all-electric option on heating and cooling. I think by limiting it to that, there's not a need for additional exemptions, because it's just heating and cooling. So unless staff wants to figure something out in between now and when it comes back, if we're just sticking to heating and cooling, then that applies to heating and cooling. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
I agree with your statement. I guess I would like staff's opinion on that.
When it comes back or tonight?
Sure. Either way is fine with me.
Directors of
I
staff?
don't know if staff's prepared to answer that question now or not, and that's why I made
Yeah.
sort of a joke there. But,
I tried to also, when I was phrasing it, leave it open to, like, unless there's something we're not thinking of, but heating and cooling in a restaurant, heating and cooling.
okay, well,
Yeah.
you're making it sound easier than I'm making it sound. So, thank you.
Yeah, so I think I look for some kind of nodding from the two of you that you understand the general direction on that point, and then if there are things that we've not thought of in this moment, that you'll highlight those for us when it comes back for the community and for our consideration. That it's new buildings. Go ahead, Councilmember Fahey.
I was just going to add heating and cooling, but also hot water, heating water.
Water heating, is that what you were intending to mean, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney? Yeah. Is
Thank
that what
you.
everybody's intending to mean? I'm just waiting to see if that's what everybody was intending to mean. Okay. And then it sounded like there was more consensus around bringing back the fleshing out around policy option 1. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Could you explain that a little bit?
I think policy option 1 was basically just to make buildings more efficient, and I guess I would defer back to staff to sort of highlight what that meant.
Right, so I think, policy option 1 is the EUI option, and that would not require net zero, but it would require more efficient buildings, and it would be you could achieve it both with more efficient buildings and on-site solar offsets. You couldn't do off-site credits, but between on-site solar or renewable and more efficient buildings, you have to hit a target score, and we need to figure out what target score we want to aim for.
All right, so thank you for the explanation. So what you're saying is flesh out that idea more so we have a better understanding.
Of what it is and bring that back.
And whether or not that's a policy decision. Thank you.
Member Fahey?
One other question is, this is only for new construction? So
New
it's-
buildings, I said, yep.
So it's not for an addition to an
Right.
existing, okay.
I didn't hear anybody going into details about percentages or anything like
Yeah,
that. New buildings seemed like there was consensus from everyone.
Yeah.
And like there'd need to be more community conversation about add-ons or changes and modifications. But a new building, which would include like a disaster when a building is gone and then has to be built new, like that is a new building. So we would want to understand the impact of that. Because sometimes, unfortunately, we now know. Do people feel like we covered the questions we need to answer to further the conversation for the next time we have a conversation? I'm asking all of you. So I think that there are 5 people that feel like this is an okay strategy. If you want to add anything, I didn't necessarily get a lot of movement from 2 folks, and I mean, it's certainly open for conversation. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, one of the things that I haven't stated, but I think it's important to state, at this point, I think the cohort option is something I'm interested in, but I'm not necessarily patient with it. And so one of the things I think is important is for us to get report outs of what the status is, at least in some quarterly, or I don't know what the right time frame would be, so we can be judging whether or not it's the course we want to stay with or not. Because I agree with everybody's concerns, but if this direction's not going anywhere, then we may want to change course, but I want to know that. So.
Thank you. That's a great idea. So if we could have updates at some frequency that you think is appropriate, Kayla, that'd be awesome. And I think to the point of picking the option that we asked to have bring back, like it's on the same track of what 2 of the communities have already adopted. It's, the direction the cohort's already pointed in. So I think it's consistent with participating in the cohort. And then it's a matter of whether, if the cohort is further along by December and what other communities are thinking when it comes back. Any other comments from folks? All right. We will see you next time when we have more information on this topic. Meeting's adjourned.